Last week, your solo host, Stephen, myself, shared a hot take that some book authors' sudden hot takes on political topics add more heat than light. These cringe political posts distract from the author's job and they confuse fans. And some of these posts go even further into sinful slanders. Now that Zach is back, let's re-engage this topic or this sequel as fans and explore hope for biblical unity without telling anyone to stop with the politics or missing real concerns about our world. How can authors post better about these topics if they post at all?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Just affixed my I voted sticker to the front of my forehead. This is Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, whose mission is to help you escape bad books and find the best Christian-made fantasy and science fiction for the glory of Christ. I'm E. Stephen Burnett. I publish Lorehaven.com. I'm also the author of Above the Circle of Earth, a sci-fi novel launched last year from Enclave Publishing. And I do keep up with politics, but sometimes it gets a little much if politics are everything.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and if you vote for Pedro, he will make your wildest dreams come true. And this is episode 299, Should Christian Authors Post About Politics? And this is part 2 of at least 2.
Zach, it's not even election season. There's still a part of me that thinks there's election season, and then there's duck season and wabbit season. But nowadays, especially in certain corners of the interwebs, every season is election season, and it's getting a bit much, especially when readers want to go somewhere to have a break from it all, even if they are otherwise engaged with what's going on in the world.
Yes, and as I will always say, my one political sign I will put up is I voted for Kodos, which is a Simpsons reference from the 90s. So yes, don't blame me. I voted for Kodos. and if you're not familiar with that episode, I'll spoil it really quick. It's where Homer gets abducted by space aliens, and they then impersonate Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, and Bill Clinton and George Bush Sr. That was the election that Ross Perot was in, and pretty hilariously show that the two-party system is really just a scam run by aliens. Yes, the aliens just basically vote themselves into power. And it's just a fantastic episode. Very cynical Gen X episode, but also very funny.
That sounds like the plot of maybe Maxine Justice Book 3 there. Free shout out there for podcast guest of the past, Daniel Schwabauer. Zach, you were out of town on not some alien issue. Actually, not out of town. Actually, the Novel Marketing Conference was in town, and you went. Real quick, I got to know how that went.
That was a great conference. It was for authors of fiction and nonfiction who want to market their books and find more readers for their books. And I was there to talk about podcasting, and I actually just talked about all of you who listen to this show and all of you who have been guests on the show. It was really fun to play a lot of sound bites from the show and kind of explain to people how to be a great guest on a podcast, how to have a good sound bite, how to provide value to a podcast and make it fun for the listener, not turn the whole episode into a sales pitch or an infomercial. A lot of things happened while we were there at the conference. There's this whole Molt book thing that's happening, these open claw robots that run autonomously on your computer and do all kinds of things. And 2 of these robots have created podcasts. And so that was really weird to see that, like, oh my gosh, the AI are creating their own podcast now. That's a little spooky, but no one's really going to listen to that anyway. It's just kind of a novelty thing. We have real human guests on this show.
Yeah, this show is made by humans, and it's been made by humans for now, as of next week, 300 episodes. Zach, I think we may have actually already crossed that total in our stream there, because I think we had a an off episode or so, but this is the numbered 300th episode that we'll have next week. So I am grateful for that. Grateful for all of you listeners. I will say more in the next episode, but I am feeling more positive in this one. Now, our last episode, part 1 of Should Christian Authors Post About Politics, was necessarily more negative. And as a result, frankly, I expect that episode to get more feedback than this episode, but we are going to do this episode anyway, because this is the positive part, you guys. I want to build on last week by talking more proactively about how we'd like to see better behavior from authors as fans, as readers. And I just want to say, though, starting out too, I am grateful for authors who keep things focused. I don't mean I want every author never to say anything about political stuff, but I do notice authors, when you do post political stuff and it is measured, it is faithful, it is firm, and it's gracious, and you invite interaction from people on your social media. And by the way, this applies no matter what your position is. There are people who are sponsors even of this show and authors who I'm friendly with who will post takes that are a little bit different from how I would have said it, or maybe a lot different, but they're not rude about it. They're not calling people to account or condemning them for how they vote or suggesting that they're going to be under threat of God's judgment if they do this and such, all of which I do not take kindly to per our last episode. I just want you to know, even if I don't engage, if I see your episode and I scroll past, even if I hit the snooze on the Facebook because I'm protecting myself from getting involved and losing focus, I do appreciate those takes and I would love to see more of them. And we have a new review at Lorehaven. We appreciate all of the authors who also just stay focused on their fantasy. And that's for the restitching of Camille Dulaine, a new out from Enclave Publishing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And we got an advanced look at that book now. It's the sequel from Lindsay A. Franklin. You'll see all the links in the show notes, along with the link to subscribe for your Lorehaven. Get updates and join the Lorehaven Guild on Discord, which is now of particular interest to authors because we have the authorship wing of the guild. It is author supported. You can sign up for that at the creative level if you like, and at the pro novelist level, you will get access to open your own booth in the book festival. Speaking of our sponsors, the restitching of Camille Dulaine, that is now out from Enclave Publishing, from Oasis Family Media. A splintered world, a heart gone cold, hope reborn in threads of gold. After accidentally bridging the story worlds together, Emlyn Dulaine faces an impossible task: sever the connections without destroying the stories themselves. If she fails, the characters will be trapped in twisted versions of their tales, forced to relive their worst moments forever. But undoing the bridges is only the beginning. To truly fix what's unraveling, Emlyn must uncover the secret flaw buried deep in Rivenlay's foundation, something that's been wrong since the very start. And the danger has never been closer to home. The clock is ticking for the injured wyvern who needs Rivenlight air to survive, and the story boy Emlyn swore she'd never fall for. Emlyn and her team must rescue Frank and Laramie from chaotic, shifting story spheres before they're gone for good. There's more to that book cover from Enclave Escape with this highly anticipated sequel to The Unraveling of Emlyn Dulaine, and it is called The Restitching of Camille Dulaine, from the Carroll Award-winning author of the Weaver trilogy, Lindsay A. Franklin. It is available today, available now wherever fantastic books are sold, and you can ask for it at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online from Amazon. It's also an audiobook from Oasis Audio. You can see that gorgeous cover in the show notes for this episode, $299, right on the cusp of those 300 episodes. And I'm going to roll right into our next sponsor because we want to put them up front because they did the same for us, as Realm Makers 2026 Conference and Expo coming this June, not July this year, but this June in St. Louis, Missouri in the USA. Don't miss the premier gathering for Christian storytellers of fantasy and science fiction, calling all authors and artists in the industries of graphic novels, gaming, animation, and audio drama, as well as film and TV. Realm Makers is where you will find your tribe, own your craft, and advance your career. Registration is now open for this in-person and virtual event this June 24th through 27th at the St. Louis Union Station Hotel. So it'll be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 3 full days of training from professionals. That's different this year. Realmmakers is advancing. Plus the epic Realm Awards costume banquet to celebrate the best novels released last year. And if you're not an author, you're still invited Friday and Saturday because that is the free expo. Readers and fans, doors open, and shopping is free for the general public. If you want to attend the sessions and panels as well as meet and greets with special guests, though, there are tickets required for that. And of course, for the Writers Conference proper. I'm going to be there with the Lorehaven booth and also with Above the Circle of Earth and more. You can get that Realmmakers link at realmmakers.com. The conference registration is available now. It's 4 months away. Zach, you signed up?
I'm signed up, and I'm bringing my middle daughter for the 3rd time. She just finished her first manuscript, and she's starting to edit that, I think, pretty soon. And she'll be there to learn everything in the awesome teen track being taught by former guest on the show, Nova McBee, excellent author of fiction that my wife and daughters have all enjoyed. And I'll be there in the classes. I'll be there to hang out at the booth and meet everyone in the expo. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I cannot wait. I'm getting my costume together. I'm already starting to pack. So, of course, at a conference like that, you're going to have some celebrity authors, at least in the Christian world, and celebrity creators, and more so as Realmmakers grows. And Zach, I just realized even after reading that sponsor copy that part of what keeps me, I hope, from going too far in the incendiary politics direction is knowing that a lot of the people on my social feeds, I'm going to meet them for real in a real location. And I want to make sure, not that I'm just being nice and non-offensive, but that I'm not assuming things of these people that I ought not. It's not just names on a feed. These are actual human beings made in the image of God. And so if that's a good take, I wish that it was shared by the subjects of our first chapter, the top recent celebrity political wins and fails, because in just the 1 week since I recorded that episode, Zach, we've seen a lot of those, even just with the Grammy Awards last Sunday night. And there was one performer, Miss Billie Eilish, who got up and said some stuff. And I don't know much about her, but I actually kind of feel some sympathy for her because she obviously got up and was just maybe going along with the trends. And she said something rather stupid. And suddenly everybody piled on, and I'm there with my own Simpsons reference, even though I'm a Christian, saying, stop, she's already dead, lay off, but no, maybe there need to be some natural consequences for saying stupid stuff that you don't actually mean, and you just kind of want to sound like you care. I think some celebrities can get away with this because they're big, and a lot of people might cite some examples, even in response to me last week. It's like, well, a Christian author might say, like, look, J.K. Rowling can say whatever she wants because she lives in a castle and everything. And I just want to remind you, J.K. Rowling had the castle first before she got involved with the bigger issues, which, by the way, technically don't relate to her books, but her series is complete and her legacy is largely assured. I don't mean she's totally uncancelable, but it's not like she was doing that kind of thing all along. And by the way, I happen to know it is something that she personally feels very strong about, defending the rights of girls and women as opposed to the supposed rights of men who think that they're girls and women. Not cool. And I largely support what she's doing. On the other side, people might point out, I saw kind of a fake story about actor George Clooney. And they said that he wasn't going to be in the movie because they were going to require him to avoid politics for 2 years. And I was pretty sure that was fake. And I think it is because it's kind of obvious. George Clooney's a very involved guy. He's got a legacy of a lot of movies. He's more from the political left, but he's a little bit more moderate in tone, and he seems like a sincere fellow. I think for him, people just expect he's going to be that way because he always was. And I think the same is true for conservative actors who find work even though people know what their politics are. In a sense, it's baked in. People know what to expect. But for authors who haven't done any of that before, who feel tempted to be just as open all of a sudden about what they feel, I just want to ask, are you big like George Clooney or J.K. Rowling or any of those guys? Like, they can afford castles and $10,000 suits. I don't think that an author can buy a $10,000 suit, presumably on credit, and then get as big as George Clooney. You got to get big first and then be able to afford the luxury of sharing whatever you think about anything at that particular moment. If you're not there, I think the cringe political post is no upgrade. It is a downgrade. But Zach, I want to turn that over to you because I had plenty to say in the last episode and you heard it. And I'm curious just what your overall take is on these sudden politically charged posts from authors, not just Christian authors or fantasy authors or Christian fantasy authors, but just any authors or pastors or people that you don't expect to, like, oh, suddenly you have a hot take. Well, that's nice. Where were you before? Are you even involved in this? Like, what's your take on that, Zach?
I think so much of this is just the trap of social media that we see everyone else sharing their opinions. So we're like, oh, I guess I have to do that too, because we're essentially all publishers now on the interwebs. And, and obviously we're talking here to people who are online. You, our listener, might not have social media. You may have sworn it off or deleted your apps. Good for you if you've never gotten it in the first place. My daughters still do not have Instagram and do not want it. They meet people all the time that are like, you don't have an Instagram? Oh, wow, that's wonderful. I wish I could delete mine. And they're like, yeah, I think I'm never going to get it now. But this is sort of the weird pressure that everyone feels who's online, that they must give an opinion or they must respond to someone's opinion. It's kind of a madness machine right now. I just want to say, first of all, that I think there's wisdom in just resisting that pressure. And so much of this pressure comes from corporate news, mainstream news, legacy news, whatever you want to call it, cable news, that it all kind of tilts in the same direction if you haven't noticed. That's nothing new. And it is kind of disappointing when, you see people that usually don't comment on current events until something blows up on the newspaper headlines and all the, the primetime cable news. And it's like, did you really think this through? Is this really a strong opinion, or are you just kind of giving into that peer pressure from mass media, especially when your opinion lines up entirely with what mass media is telling you your opinion should be? So I'm trying to thread a needle here, Stephen. I believe very much in the reality of how propaganda works, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But also the fact that people have agency. People are not automatons that are just doing whatever their programmers tell them. I mean, there is the NPC meme, right? Like we've probably seen that, where people just kind of repeat the party slogans. But look, people make their own decisions. They have free will. And so they have accountability for those decisions. I think it's a little too easy just to let people off the hook and say, oh, well, they're just going along with whatever people told them. It's well-meaning. You mentioned Billie Eilish. I mean, she wrote a speech, essentially, right? She knew she was a finalist. She knew she could win. So she had been thinking about what she would say. And yes, she repeated this kind of brainless slogan, but that's also the power of these slogans. It's also the power of propaganda. There was a really good essay about this from Michael Clary, and he showed these 4 different images that sparked immense media firestorms over the last 5 years or so. All of which, in his example, turned out to be hoaxes. The most obvious of these ones was the Jussie Smollett, this actor who said that he was attacked.
Smollett.
Yeah, who said he was attacked by people who shouted horrible things and political slogans. And it turned out he made this all up. He contrived the whole thing. He hired people to fake attack him and take pictures to essentially make himself a victim. And so much so that he was charged with filing a false police report. I think that got dismissed or something, but that was the pinnacle example of this, where, and Michael Clary's point is that when a viral image spreads, it activates your emotions and you feel this pressure to say something about it. It's so easy to act out of that emotion. And then when the facts come out later that that wasn't really the whole story, or that's not even true what that image was showing you, it's hard to back out of that, because now you've made this statement in front of everyone. And so you either have to apologize to everyone, to your hundreds or thousands of social media followers, or you just have to double down. Or you have to say, well, it's, what's the phrase? It was factually false, but morally true, and sort of pivot and just try to make another point in that same vein. And that is the power of propaganda. It means you don't have to think, you don't have to even defend yourself. It really shows how human psychology works, because we often have that emotional response that we then try to rationalize, especially if we've already acted on that emotion. So that is the reality of how all this works, although people do have free choice. The last thing I want to say is a question I think everyone's asking, and I even saw a tweet about this, is why does every musician and movie star or Christian author secretly want to be a politician?
Boom. Yeah. That goes to my point of, are you bored of your job? As probably one of my best points, frankly, for the last episode is, it gives the impression to me that the author is feeling like he's got idle hands. And suddenly you've got some time and maybe the illusory luxury of reputation to go out on a limb and post something that is going to call into question a fair portion of your own fans or your friends, or it's as if it's judging them harshly based on some denominational distinctive. And really, we've got to start thinking about some, not all, but some political issues as more like differences between denominations. This is not a different, it's not a life and death issue necessarily, whether so-and-so agency enforces the law this way, or even you vote for this person because you think they're the least worst option. Like, Christians do have a large degree of freedom there. And before we start talking about those issues and who may actually be right, I think we've got to respect one another. That's why I ended the last episode with probably some of my strongest language about, we've got to stop judging one another falsely, false judgment of, if you do this, are you even a Christian? Or if you vote this way, then I don't want to hear from you. You can't buy my stuff. This is nasty, nasty stuff. And only those who can afford to throw away parts of their reputation or their money or their time can do this sort of thing, like the big actors. And most of us are not that way. And frankly, I don't know if we want to be that way. But to switch back to the more positive before we move to the next chapter, as I said at the top, I am grateful for those who do this in a more studied fashion. They may have some very strident beliefs, but they are obviously willing to be partners and do business and even have relationships with those who disagree. They seem to have a surplus of grace for their critics and for people who disagree with them. And I think that from biblical perspective, as well as a marketing perspective, I want to follow authors who seem to have that kind of grace and surplus, instead of going on a vengeance quest out of poverty or desperation for attention or the sorts of things they think they can get if they act like the big authors or influencers. A big tip here, a little bit more for the author side of things. I want to see authors who give more than they take, or give the impression of giving more than they take. And that really gets closer to the biblical ideal of being a servant. He who would become the greatest of all must be your servant. Otherwise, these kinds of authors kind of look desperate for attention and often insincere. And frankly, I think a lot of them don't have the time to do what you were saying earlier, Zach, to follow up and say, hey, I got it wrong when I overreacted about that thing. Like, well, now you've just pulled your entire career in the direction of punditry instead of creativity. And if that's the risk that you take, then maybe you ought not post anything at all. Best to be silent and not reveal yourself as a possible fool.
Yeah, the problem is not really people sharing their political opinions.
No.
But sharing opinions that are half-formed, not very thoughtful, hyper-emotional, or flat out dishonest, uncharitable, grinding an axe. So really, it's just the fruit of the Spirit is the issue. Something that is written with the fruit of the Spirit, that clarifies things, that proclaims truth, that is good towards others. It doesn't insult. It invites discussion. It doesn't use dishonest tactics like sophistry or Mott and Bailey fallacies, which is a huge, huge problem, by the way. If you remember nothing else about political hot takes, look up Mott and Bailey fallacies, because
that's one of the worst.
That dominates so much of the discourse. And give people an off-ramp, let people save face and don't just put everyone into a corner. That's a whole other thing. So much of what gets written and shared is very coercive. It's say this or agree with this or else. And we've literally seen people do this physically, like raise your fist or we're going to mob your house or your cafe or we're going to cancel you unless you repeat this slogan. I mean, the online equivalent of that, I guess the verbal equivalent of that is no better, right? It's sort of the emotional hostage taking. These are issues of character. It's not even really an issue of a political opinion. It's how people go about sharing those opinions that's the real issue.
Right. I may have a different take, Zach, than even some Christian authors, or at least I want this to be my take. And history will reveal whether I'm changing here or just digging deeper into what I've always felt. I believe that most authors, particularly in the fiction space, have a responsibility to provide not a neutral space, or I dare say safe space, but a secure place to talk about these things, and more often to go underneath the surface issues to talk about the morals and the worldviews that are closer to the foundation. And fiction alone and storytelling and music and art has the ability to help us do that, not to escape from those big issues, but to go a little deeper than the buzzwords and the headlines du jour. That's what I think the best stories can do, even those that are set in our world and even those that may involve Christian characters, but how much more so fantasy stories that enable us to strip out all of the different triggering phrases and party jargon and all of that, and look at things from a different angle. I think that many authors have that responsibility, or maybe your responsibility, author, is just to provide a good kind of escape. This isn't my kind of story, but it's many kinds of people's stories. Like, they just want to take a break from the rancor and escape into a faraway land where the worst thing you can encounter is royal drama and the magician of the court who's up to no good. You know, romantasy stories, royal dramas, they have their place too, not just stuff that equips us for the battle in real life.
Yes, I want to hear stories about the rancor, not political rancor.
There you go. There's the pull quote there. Well, you may get a pull quote as well from our next sponsor, Interregnum by J.A. Webb. Now, some stories like this one do equip us to deal with some of the harsher realities we face, because in this story, it's the year 2158 and the world did not end. It was enslaved. Now comes the third installment in J.A. Webb's Seekers series titled Interregnum, and the war in heaven, the battle in unseen places, just got real. The Seekers are humanity's last hope, hunted by the eye of the Eternal, the Order's merciless secret police. These brave rebels have risked everything to find the lost words of Creator God, banned for generations and lost to living memory. Now, what began as a quest for truth has evolved into a desperate struggle for survival as, trapped and cornered, the Seekers must overcome not just their pursuers, but also their own doubts and fears as their own faith and even their sanity begins to unravel. Their beleaguered company threatens to fracture beneath the pressure of constant pursuit and uncertain reward as they ask, is this quest worth the sacrifice of their lives? Watch for Interregnum, an epic dystopian thriller of deception, faith, and the fight for truth, coming soon and available for pre-order today. Zach, when you talking about politics, you get almost as much interaction as you do talking about politics. And what's kind of fun is in the Lorehaven Guild on Discord, we actually have as close to a no politics rule as we can in the Code of Honor. It discourages discussion about policies, platforms, and personalities, and encourages issues that go underneath those. So we got to have a great discussion about this episode last week, 298. Starting with this quote, if you've got it there, from our own guild master, Tisha Messing, who I think speaks for a lot of fans. And hey, authors, if you're listening, this is for you. These are readers, okay? These aren't, other authors who are in your space, like technically Zach and I are getting to be. These are many, if not most, of your fans. So Tisha's a big fan. So Zach, if you've got that quote.
So Tisha says, quote, I have several indie authors I read or recently subscribed to their newsletters who all took part in a joint political statement over the weekend with the same general idea. It was clearly to win political points for their side, and it was clearly a, if you do not agree with me, you are wrong. And reading it, I felt dirty and used. Even the author who tried to be more circumspect in how she talked about it, because it was still clear what she was talking about. My problem is I come to their newsletters not to read about politics. It is my refuge from politics. I read them to find out about their writing and how it's going, a quick glimpse into their life, some book recommendations, and maybe a snippet of their upcoming book. Instead, all of these newsletters had paragraphs about political issue, end quote.
Yeah, that's more. Notice what she said there. That's more about expectations. It's not that she said, I can't stand politics, although some readers do feel that way and you got to respect them. But it's not why she's there to read those newsletters. So why in the world are people suddenly deciding, these authors suddenly seeming to decide, I'm bored with talking about my books. I want to talk about politics now. Well, that's not why I started reading. If I started listening to a podcast that was about politics and instead they're talking about sports, well, I would get bored very quickly and maybe annoyed. Not because I disagreed with your political take, although I probably would, but because you changed up on me. I was expecting apples and you gave me oranges. Why, Zach? Why do people do that?
Well, they're definitely betraying their base or their genre conventions, you could say, their genre expectations. It's kind of like when you watch a movie and it suddenly takes a sharp turn into something else, and not in a fun way, but like what just happened? Why are we going into this now? I'm going to steal one of my best principles from chapter 3 and say it now, which is I hope to never use my platform, such as it is, to push some political opinion. In other words, that the entire point of becoming an author is to then share some hot take on some issue, as though that's, being an author is a means to an end. Again, it goes back to what I asked earlier. Why does every author, movie star, musician want to be a politician? And I think it really goes to something you even said in the Guild, Stephen, which is it's only people that suspect there's nothing worthwhile about their songs and stories that they just see their own art as a means to political ends. And that's just kind of sad. I mean, because what that tells your readers is, my books are okay. I may have spent years working on this book and just immense amount of research and frustration and editing. But actually, none of that really matters. What matters is the topic du jour that I'm going to spread a annoying opinion about.
But Zach, it's not a political end, it's a moral end. I mean, no matter your politics, everyone should agree on this. And I go back to what I said last time. Well, hold on. You can't just jump to the moral conclusion and hit the win button. Sometimes there's a little bit more nuance. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to laws and policy. And I think our next reader here, Jason Huff in the Guild, really gets at that in his comment. He's really seeking to challenge the motives of some of these cringe posts. And it's worth reading his whole comment. Quote, what is difficult about social media in general is that most posts about politics aren't about determining a side or discussing a moral issue, but virtue signaling. It doesn't matter if the viewpoint is left, center, right, or even a pox on all the houses. Most of the time, political posts are subtly saying, I am a good and moral person for speaking out on X issue. This is not usually the direct and overt intention, but it's still there on another level. When I say virtue signaling, I'm not saying that they aren't actually morally correct in their address, but that there usually isn't a lot of stake in doing so. Most people live, work, and play with people much like them, and they post things their friend pool is going to agree with. And so when posting anything political, the question has to be, what is the reason to be posting this? It's usually not to inform, because I'd say anyone aware of news right now has heard about Minneapolis. It's to give a viewpoint. But unless you live in that area, does it affect your daily life right now? Not so much. The stakes are small. So when I see authors and other creatives I follow giving political opinions, I generally tune out. I'm not there for that. I'm more interested in how you're living out that belief. Whether helping a local legal refugee family or befriending your local police force or however that issue plays out in your everyday life, end quote.
Yeah, this is such a great point. I especially like what he said. If you don't live there and it doesn't affect your daily life, why are you talking about it? Okay, I'm going to engage in a little bit of speculation, and I fully admit this is a little bit of psychoanalysis. I could be wrong, but here's why I think people do this. I think a lot of people have comfortable lives and they feel guilty about it. They look at the world and they have sort of this zero-sum mentality of the only reason that I am wealthy, or I live in a 4-bedroom house, or I have a nice job, is because I've taken away something from someone else. The whole idea of privilege, all right? And it's this mentality that makes you sort of this slave to a guilt feeling until you can find a release for it. But a lot of people don't actually want to give up all those privileges they have. I mean, unless, of course, they move overseas with the Peace Corps or become a missionary or something. Going back to Billie Eilish, everyone is like, oh, okay, so you admit you live on stolen land. So that was stolen from the Tongva tribe. So how about you give it back to them? And someone even drafted up a legal brief that this tribe could use pro bono. And it was hilarious.
Just everyone's trolling poor Billie Eilish now, but yeah.
Right. So again, she didn't really believe that slogan because she's not going to go through on it. But here's why people say that. It's because if I can care about something or say that I care about something far away that doesn't actually affect me, that I don't actually have to sacrifice anything for, then I can feel good about what I have. And it's much harder to care and sacrifice for someone near to you. So near caring versus far caring. I think this is the actual political divide in our country, because one is easy and makes you look nice. The other one is hard and really no one notices. It's a false form of righteousness that people are pursuing. Now, there's my political hot take. You may disagree, but that's kind of what I've been gathering over the last few years.
Well, I think that feeling haunts a lot of us, Zach, even if we are not like upper middle class or supremely wealthy, because it's closely related to a Christian virtue called humility. And that, however, can go a little too far. Humility is not humiliation. Meekness is not weakness. Christ, in many of his parables, praises those who work hard and invest and get the rewards. And he seems to like that idea, which is kind of rooted in his original call to Adam and Eve, and then uses that as an example for those who sacrifice much and then enter the kingdom, and how important that system of rewards is. Now, that doesn't deny grace, but it is parallel to grace in that it does recover that original call to stewardship for Adam and Eve. And Christians, I think, really need to get a hold of this idea of stewardship and root that in the original call to steward creation of Genesis 1:27 through 28. And if we don't understand that, I think we are going to end up going too far and undervaluing the value, the crucial need for art and storytelling and music. And sometimes, Zach, you can tell, and I know that there's bad days for authors and artists of all kinds, but sometimes you can tell when the author or artist truly believes in what he or she is doing and knows that they don't have to comment on the headline du jour with a cringe post or otherwise. They know what they're doing is worthwhile. They know that it has some kind of kingdom value for eternity. And so they don't feel that deficit or that need to use what they do as a means to some other moralistic crazy crusade. And sometimes you can tell there are many actors and directors and authors who don't talk about that stuff, not because they're cowards or not paying attention, but because they don't feel like they have to. They know what they're doing. They have that kind of confidence, sometimes even when they're not Christians.
Yeah, it's very clear who writes about things because it actually affects them and who just wants to talk about the hottest new trend. I mean, there's a whole meme about this, like, I am now an expert on international oil tankers, or whatever. There's always a daily expert on something that thinks they are qualified to give an opinion about something. And this is one of those things that's already being replaced by AI. Just cringe political takes. And I'm going to say something before I get to our next quote here, which is that what makes us human are our personal stories. And what makes our beliefs and hot takes authentic is when there's a personal connection to something. There was a friend of mine on Facebook that was just going on rant after rant about immigration stuff. And I'm like, okay, I really am not interested in the 100th identical opinion about this topic, until she switched and said, immigration is very personal to me because we've adopted a son from such and such country. And right now he's in limbo because of such and such court proceeding, bill in Congress, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm 100% more interested in what you have to say.
Well, because now you're invested. She has stakes, real stakes.
And I typically stay out of these comments in Facebook, but it's like, I would engage with that and say like, okay, well, how will this actually affect you? You know, to explain how this court case or whatever, this bill is actually affecting that. I want to know, maybe I don't know something, but also maybe you don't know something, and maybe it's just the hype train thinking you know something. But anyway, that's more interesting. Or I'll just put myself on the hot seat. I've been sharing a lot of opinions about Iran. Well, why? It's because I have a lot of friends from there. And so the events happening there, the military conflict or not, or who knows, I mean, that is directly affecting people close to me. It's something I feel very personal. I don't talk about Venezuela really because I don't really know. I know one person, I think, from Venezuela from a long time ago. So it's that personal connection that makes it interesting. Okay, I want to read from Peter Schott, who wants to re-hinge certain friends of his. He says, quote, "Personally, I hit a couple of acquaintances who I disagree with politically. On some things we can just discuss and let it go. And others, the posts are just unhinged. I just mute or snooze the guy for 30 days. I've done that too."
That's a Facebook exclusive, though.
Yeah. There was someone else who just went off the deep end. Almost everything posted was hateful, cussing, and such. That earned a permanent block. It was sad to see someone go that far off the beaten path. I did have one friend who started calling his own friends Nazis, which is actually kind of anti-Semitic if you really want to get into it, and such, because they disagreed with him on politics. And that was 10 years ago. I called him out on that as a Christian brother, and he was able to realize that he'd gotten a little too far down the path and took a break, and he backed off. End quote. Well, that's a happy ending to that story.
And a rare happy ending, but I have noticed, and Zach, it does help if you have personal relationships with these friends. I have had people, yes, who definitely go off the deep end, and they do what is called blackpilling. And that kind of applies no matter what side you're on. If you suddenly start behaving as if all is lost, as if Christ has stepped off the throne and decided to let something else up on there, and that we are not moving toward a grand eucatastrophe finale for history, then really that kind of, you go too far in that direction, and then you actually do end up in an area that is not biblical at all. And if you're just constantly in that space, if that's all that you're saying on your platforms, or first I wonder, like, is this all that you live in your daily life? Are you doom scrolling all the time? Are you just now descending into this ever swirling hatred really against your Christian brothers and sisters who aren't all woke to this terrible stuff as you are? Well, then first, you really don't need to be having anything to do with fiction. And usually, Zach, as I said last week, people or authors who end up going this direction, their posture is basically anti-storytelling. It's the antithesis of creativity, because instead of building something, instead of making something new, you're tearing things apart all the time. You are trying to unmake something bad. And that's just totally counterproductive to the goal of being a storyteller or an artist. And by the way, authors who do this lead to the feelings shared by our final commenter here, Janie Brooks, also in the Guild, who says she feels betrayed by political fringe posts. Quote, this is actually my question from last week's episode. When your favorite author suddenly posts hot takes about the latest controversial headlines or violent acts, how do you feel? And this hero of the Guild answers such: startled, annoyed, betrayed, hurt, saddened. Startled, because the author doesn't usually throw their hat into the political fray. Annoyed, because there are so many more topics to discuss. Annoyed, because Instagram or Facebook is my escape from the constant barrage of never-ending political opinions and current events. Betrayed, because I thought I knew who they were. Betrayed, because they've shown me a side of themselves that goes against how they've always acted. Hurt, because they've broken my trust. Hurt, because my loyalty is hard to gain and I've been blindsided by their vitriol. Saddened, because there are so many other topics in which I agree with them, but now I am anathema because of my politics. End quote.
And that is a very strong emotion, by the way, betrayal. And I think for any authors who are like feeling the temptation to post that, should really think about this comment from Janie, because betrayal is a very, very hard thing to make up for. I mean, look at how many companies have completely torched their own brand. I mean, looking at you, Cracker Barrel, and many others. And it's like, you can't get that back. You can't get that trust back. And as an author, it's very similar to being a big corporate brand. Once you sort of rebrand yourself, that's how you're going to be known. And yeah, like kind of like how Tisha said, if you go to someone for a certain thing and then you get something else, it's a bait and switch. Stephen, on my own, such as his personal website, I'm very upfront about both my Christian faith and my conservative views. Okay. Like I've written headlines for the Babylon Bee and I put them right there on the homepage. I don't want someone to start reading my stuff and then come back later and say, whoa, why didn't you tell me this is who you are? You know? And I kind of appreciate this about other authors I wouldn't agree with, like, let's say John Scalzi, who's probably one of the leading leftist sci-fi authors in that space. He's extremely vocal and upfront everywhere about his views about everything. And I'm like, okay, I don't have to follow him because I know immediately what I'm going to get into. And it's really no surprise if you've read his books, right? It's pretty on the surface. So I can at least respect that he tries to, be upfront. Now, there's other authors I read and listen to, and they just don't really talk about anything like that. They talk, if anything, about here are the personal issues and stories of my own life that drove me to create this story. Here's the connection from my heart and my soul and my backstory to this character or this plot. That's so much more interesting. And it could be a political issue. It could be a national kind of thing that happened. And I'll just give a little snippet here. The book that I'm writing deals with a very real crisis we had here in Texas and how it affected me personally. And yeah, you could say there's sort of some politics involved. And in the book, there is definitely some politics involved, but it's all like, it's not a hot take. It's just there are politicians involved in said thing. And it relates in a roundabout way to the real crisis that happened here in Texas. But it's so personal to me. It's not like an abstract idea that I just want to push on everyone.
That word matters so much, Zach. And I think as we close this chapter, that's the word that is left ringing in my mind. It's that word personal. If the issue to the author is personal, then why wouldn't he or she talk about it if he or she is naturally trying to be appropriately transparent in the social postings and the emails and the video clips and all of that? Well, then of course it's part of your real life. If I follow your work, then those personal needs, they're going to affect the work, the stories. So yes, you might want to allude to that sort of thing wisely, of course. And with wisdom and some of the principles, hopefully, we're going to talk about in the next chapter. Those are the authors who win trust, whether or not they post and whatever side they're coming from. And that there, I think, is a lot more like Christ's idea of, incarnating as a human being, of becoming an actual person, fully God, fully man. There's a term I love still, incarnational. It's basically imitating that approach. I can't storm into a group and give them a lecture about how they're wrong if I'm not part of the group. Zach, there are some authors who think they're part of a particular Christian group and they think they have earned the right to lecture them about how they're wrong or bigots
or
whatever.
I'm just like you. Hello, fellow Christian.
I know, but they're not. I'm like, dude, who are you? You haven't been around here for a long time. Like, okay, yeah, you're technically a member, but we don't grant you the rank of master. You're not even a member of the council, much less a master. Why do you have the right to lecture me? And then instead, I kind of want to go commit the same error. And like, my dude, like, you just got here. You're not part of the group. You are stepping on landmines now. You don't even know what you are saying. People don't trust you. The very people who may need to hear your warnings won't, because you are such an amateur at this. And really, the solution there is to just move on. If people want to basically torch their own platform and their reputation, then there's nothing you can do to stop them. Except maybe follow some of the more constructive rules or guidelines that Zach and I are going to talk about in our final chapter. First, however, I got to take my sponsorship. He's Stephen Burnett for my novel Above the Circle of Earth. I'm going to do this a little bit differently now off the top of my head, because I'm also setting up our next episode, the grand 300th episode of Fantastical Truth from Lorehaven. And we're going to talk about space, the final frontier, which is getting a little bit closer now with the big space news that's coming out, just like kind of a headline per day. I just saw one yesterday from the Wall Street Journal that SpaceX is going to delay their plans for Mars landings and really dig into the NASA emphasis on the moon. And hopefully next month, assuming no further problems with the Space Launch System, we're going to launch Artemis 2 with 4 astronauts. So it's a manned crew, and they're going to orbit the moon for the first time since the 70s. And then maybe even next year or so, they may land on the moon for the first time since, I guess it was Apollo 17. And now there's a lot more attention there. And really what they're accidentally doing is setting up my novel Above the Circle of Earth. So it's fun to see some of the ideas I've had for a while and these speculations like kind of sort of come to life, because wherever astronauts go and they start colonies, hopefully in the future, missionaries are not going to be far behind. That's been the case wherever we explore. And it'll be the case, hopefully, in the next century. And that's what this story is about, as Brock and Alicia Rivers return from exile on Mars to start the first space mission against the technocracy that rules the solar system in the next century, but also as some threats from their own people who would much prefer a more safe way of living. That's Above the Circle of Earth from Enclave Publishing in hardcover, audiobook, and digital. And you'll definitely want to tune into the next episode for more about that, along with that whole idea of science fiction actually coming to life in real time. Chapter 3. We'll close with, I think, my top 10 rules for political posting. I think I'm trying to abide by these, and I'm actually going to have one post I did recently about some Christian influencers saying that the One Ring equals power and power is bad, kind of a trope that keeps being thoughtlessly spread. I'm going to actually subconsciously work that through this list of top 10. And then, Zach, I want to hear yours. Top 10 rules for political posting. Number 1, basically don't post about politics. Err on that side, especially if you're new here. Number 2, but if you do not suppose that you're above politics. As Allie Beth Stuckey says, politics matter because policies matter because people matter. So if you like people, you're going to want to know a little something about the rules we all agree to live by, even if we don't like half of them. That's just human stuff. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. Number 3, discern what the term politics actually means. You can't say this isn't political, it's just moral, when it absolutely is both at the same time. Laws matter. Number 4, carefully curate post subjects based on deeper reasons. That's what I'm trying to do. I think I've not been great at that before, but you'll notice there's some topics I just don't post about. I may not know what the topic is really or have the time to dig into it. And like Sherlock Holmes with too much clutter in the brain attic, it just doesn't really affect me. Like, okay, so tariffs affect me, for example, but I don't really have an opinion on that. Maybe you do. And you're a tariffologist, in which case post away, but I'm going to try to focus. Number 5, be timely, yet beware the PETs, our little pet causes, the political emotion traps. Zach already basically talked about that earlier, getting caught up in the moment and deciding that because everybody who's anybody is saying something, I've got to say something too, or else be left out or be called a hater. Number 6, stick with big themes that support your mission and novels. That's really what I try to do, hopefully, with my last post, for example, about some, I think, bad guys storming into a church in Minnesota and threatening the congregants. Well, I like churches and I don't like bullies. So this is a kind of an easy layup for me. It's pretty easy to spot the good guys and the bad guys there. And frankly, the people, even Christian influencers, who reversed the good and bad, go on my never pay attention to you again list. You are compromised. Number 7, avoid the great sins of slander and casting false judgment. So that's so important, even with the last one. There may be people who get caught up in that story and repeat the bad version of that news. Well, I want to try to be tolerant of people who get caught up and not slander you as if you're just some evil crusading activist. And I certainly don't want to accuse you of being a fake Christian or in danger of the fires of hell because you disagree with me on a secondary issue. That's not only foolish of me, that's actually sinful. Number 8, always rejoice with the truth and do not spread false reports. Watch for the AI videos, you guys. They're usually pretty obvious now, but they've got this little sheen to them. I know they're going to get better technically, but just be very, very, very careful. And also, don't spread false reports about motives. We saw a case like this just in the past week where the whole Occam's razor idea much more simply explains what happened. Don't just go along with your preconceptions there. If in doubt, don't post anything. Number 9, for lesser known topics, do not meddle in quarrels not your own. Folks, this is why I don't post any hot takes about covenant baptism versus believers baptism. I haven't had the time to dig into it. I kind of have my default side there, but I'll let the professional theologians sort that out. And hopefully they get paid to do so. I don't. That's time that I'm throwing away. And number 9, I borrowed this language from the 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi. In the very last episode of Doctor Who, there have been none since, alas.
There have also been no new Star Wars movies. Yeah.
No, not at all, except for Mandalorian seasons 1 through 2 and Andor. This is from Stephen Moffat, where the 12th Doctor says, "Never be cruel, never be cowardly. Remember, hate is always foolish, love is always wise. Always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind." I like that last phrase. That's good writing. Always try to be nice, but the contrasting word, never fail to be kind. Sometimes kindness doesn't look like niceness. Sometimes you do need a firm take. Sometimes you do need to fight. And I love it where he says too, never be cruel, never be cowardly. That's just great balance there. Like, way to go, Stephen Moffat. I don't even know Stephen Moffat's politics. If he ranted on about them, I kind of forgot. To me, he's more known for this kind of thing and therefore counts as a better creator. Never be cruel, never be cowardly. What's in between? Courage. Courage, not cruelty. You're not a mercenary, but you're not just some shrinking pacifist either. Courage may call for an actual courageous act. Maybe you know what's right as an author and you need to post something about that and it relates to you personally. In which case, go for it. Even if I disagree with you, I will respect you.
Yeah, I think cruelty is often caused by cowardice. It's how people try to preemptively disarm any debate. So I have a list of kind of my best practices for these hot topics. And I'll just say some of these are very personal to me and it may not apply to everyone, and that's fine. I've thought for a long time about how I want to go about all this. My first big rule, and this may sound funny, and these are not hard and fast rules, okay? These are like my best practices. But number 1 is I don't talk about by name or reply to the posts of politicians. It makes it so easy to say no and not get into some big thing that everyone else is talking about. The reality is there are simply too many politicians doing too many controversial things. And politicians by their nature are disaster artists. They suck all the oxygen out of the room. And many of them are drama queens. They're just saying things to get negative attention, and they don't deserve it. So don't waste your energy, first of all, on the actual politicians actually posting stuff online, because they just want to make you angry or afraid or something. So this really just helps my mental health. It very much goes along with a secondary thing here, which is I try not to argue with strangers on the internet, especially people that are being verbally abusive. I just mute or block people like that. If all I did was argue and disagree with people, there would be an endless supply of doing that, and I wouldn't be able to do anything creative or productive.
Yeah, it's about protecting your times. I mean,
Yeah.
I do wonder about these people like, okay, either you're just super successful, you've got time to spare, or you are wandering from your true calling that day. Do you have a job? Do you have a family? Maybe they needed that care.
Yeah, and I'll engage with good faith disagreement, but just not the abusive kind. Now, having said all that, there are certain cultural, moral, and spiritual topics that will inevitably overlap with a certain politician's something.
Yeah, they're pretty political.
So that's inevitable, and that's fine. And I'm not going to avoid those topics. But I also don't have to comment on everything happening in the news or defend everything a politician says or does. Like that way lies madness. And I'll also just say, there's usually just very dishonest, one-sided attacks going on. And I have no interest in any of that. There's so much uncharitable takes on everyone. So but whenever I see that dynamic, I'm like, I'm just not interested. On a more positive side, and this is, again, part of this is just my personality. If you take the ocean test, the big five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, the A for agreeableness, I'm very high on agreeableness. And so I just kind of lean into that. I try to find people to agree with, but comment in a way that adds something new. So I don't want to just be a yes man to everyone, but there is a type of personality that's a negative reply guy. Like every now and then I'll get a comment from someone and I'll go look at their profile and they have literally no posts under their main timeline. But then I look at their like post count and it's like 3,000 posts. I'm like, what? And then I'll look at the replies and everything they've ever posted is a reply to someone.
Wow.
So first of all, I'm like, is this even a human or is this just a bot, like a reply bot? But then you look at it and it's like, oh, actually, I think that is a human. It's a human reply bot. Their entire shtick is I'm just going to drop into everyone's comment and disagree with everyone. And just what an exhausting way to live. I can't imagine doing that. So I try to be a positive reply guy, but I try to add something interesting. So it might be a new fact or a perspective or just a way of saying something that summarizes it really well. Like brevity is its own comment. And I did this, there was okay. So again, it sounds like I'm breaking a rule here, but like someone was commenting on something with Dr. Fauci recently. Remember that guy?
Dr. Fauci? Who could probably forget him?
Yeah. So there was a long discussion about that. And I just dropped in one little joke about this to kind of summarize the whole thing. And the original guy, the OP, just was like, he just replied perfect to what I wrote. And that's what I go for. Like, I just try to make people's day, basically, with like, here's a funny way to kind of look at it. You know, ultimately, what I'm more focused on is the world of ideas. So less about the personalities and the flesh and blood conveyor of the ideas, but the spiritual powers that are at work. Like, you feel me? Like Ephesians 6, you get me? Because ultimately that's what we're battling, all right? Politicians and pundits and even political parties are going to come and go. Like they're not going to last forever. But these ideas are going to last at least a lot longer than people will. I mean, have you ever noticed that we are battling ideas that our grandparents or great-great-grandparents battled? Stephen, one of my favorite books that I read from time to time is from 1908 called The Character of Jesus by Charles Edward Jefferson. My great-grandfather read this book when he was a pastor. And I will read it and go, man, there's nothing new under the sun. Like it's the same things today as 18 years ago. And so that's what really has to be addressed is the ideas. Now, there is a significant overlap, all right, between the battle of ideas and shaping moral imagination through stories. And I think, that's the sweet spot of our podcast, right? The thing is, battling ideas is often very reactive, whereas storytelling and art is often very proactive. It's kind of getting ahead of a conversation. And I think that's truly the power of the storyteller and the artist. You can steer a conversation before, society gets to that certain milestone. On the other hand, stories can be kind of blatantly ham-fisted and reactive. I watched this movie last year called Mickey 17. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it was really interesting because it's about colonizing a far off planet, and that's always fun. And they had this character played by Mark Ruffalo, who was like this billionaire, politician, space captain, crazy narcissist guy. And at times it was really funny. And I'm like, okay, this is total satire. And I love it. I don't really care. Other times I'm like, yeah, you're just trying to be Trump. Like, because that's the actor's whole shtick. It's just, I hate Trump and that's my entire personality. And when that made it into the movie, I'm like, this is boring. Now this is just reacting to something. It's no longer a story. It's just a screed or whatever. Now, I don't think, for me, cultural pacifism is an option. I do pick my battles carefully. I don't comment on everything. And I just say that. I'm like, I don't feel the obligation to comment on everything. But I feel like I'm somewhere in between because I'm not a politician. I don't work for a political campaign. I have no desire to take part in that. I don't go stumping for politicians. I don't donate to politicians. I don't put yard signs up. I mean, I think it's weird that everyone does. Like, we live in a country with a secret ballot, okay? But I recognize too that God does call people to be involved in there. I have a close friend that works for a politician. I have another neighbor that works for a politician. There should be Christians doing that. I have a different calling though. And I think a lot of people do. And I think there are people that are called to be non-combatants. And so I think so much of the problem, Stephen, in the Christian discourse about politics is people find themselves in one of these three categories and they think everyone should be in the same category. Like you and I have seen this a lot. And I think that there are different callings we're different parts of the same body, right? But I do basically reject the practice of some Christians who put their heads in the sand when it comes to certain hot topics. And they say, I just want to focus on the gospel. Because, Jesus did address the events of his day, but he would turn them to the gospel. And the example I'm thinking of is when they say, hey, Jesus, what about all those people that Pilate murdered?
Yeah, big political headline, big tragedy.
And use them for a sacrifice, right? And Jesus is like, unless you repent, you too shall perish. They're like, wait, what?
Just Jesus juked it. Yeah, literally. If anybody can juke a thing, Jesus can do it.
But he perfectly leaned into the fear of death. And it's like, yeah, death is really bad. And what you really don't want to do is die in your sins. So you need to repent. You need to have your heart renewed by the gospel of the kingdom. And so, hiding from things is not Christ-like because Christ did not hide, but he would kind of pivot things, right? So courage is a habit though, like having the courage to speak truth in the right way, in the right time. And it's really the key to all the virtues and to really the fruit of the Spirit that we've been talking about.
Zach, I love all of that. And you reminded me of one thing I wish I'd added to my list, which is the kind of good humor that you mentioned. I love what you said. You said you want to make someone's day. That's a spirit of generosity. That's that kind of happiness and giving and overflow of grace that I mentioned earlier. And I see some pundits who are like that when it's their full-time job, though they are more bent toward contributing rather than taking. There's a warning that Jesus gives, speaking of him, about the Pharisees he said they like to go about the marketplaces and they scrunch up their faces and like, oh no, I'm fasting. Oh, I'm sacrificing. Everything is so bad. Woe is me. Woe is our society. And Jesus speaks against that. For one thing, they're being inauthentic. And for another thing, that's not really how we ought to live. I mean, Jesus is speaking in a culture that's under Roman occupation, and yet he is calling out this kind of this hypocrisy. But the main problem is not hypocrisy. It is, I think, as you said, Zach, not knowing what your job is, not knowing what your calling is. And I think that for authors who are going to post about political topics, like it's got to be personal. It's got to relate to what they're actually doing. They need to know what their job is. They need to market well and not stun people or make people feel betrayed or hurt. It's just a matter of wisdom there. Even if we move past the obvious issues of don't falsely judge your brothers and sisters, don't consign them to hell, don't blacklist them over secondary issues. There's a lot of don'ts there, but we really need to end up with a great big do. If you are going to post about these things and we're going to work them into our conversations, let's go underneath the shallow news and all of the heated headlines and get to the root causes, which is what storytelling does best.
Well, here on the Fantastical Truth podcast, we always want to highlight the best books and the best authors that we find. We try to be very positive. So here's our question for you, our listener. How has an author gained and kept your trust with their social media posts? So we want to highlight these good stories by name. So send us a note about this to podcast@lorehaven.com. Or you can tag us on social media with one of these positive stories.
And definitely join the guild as well. The discussion is hopping. More heroes are joining. And we are now in a new book quest this month for Kathy Tyer's classic space opera novel, Firebird. Next on Fantastical Truth. For most of our lives, Zach and I have kept our eyes to the stars, and we have wondered if NASA, or anybody really, will ever again get serious about launching ships up there with people inside them. And now it seems that that moment is upon us. And Lord willing, we will get that launch next month of Artemis 2 with that 4-member crew driving new great leaps back to the moon, not only to orbit, as they hopefully will next month, or to put down boots, as we hopefully will do next year or the year after, but to put down roots, a moon base. You could actually see it in your lifetime. Meanwhile, private firms are building reusable rockets that they can catch again and reuse. And they're planning satellite networks with a bunch of AI processing on board while setting their sights on Mars. What other science fictions will come true in our real world? Join us next week to discern and celebrate the God-exalting glories of human spaceflight to faraway lands for this landmark 300th episode of Lorehaven's podcast, Fantastical Truth. I love ending on that ringing note. Exploration, construction, taking risks, courage, getting beyond the politics, even to put together rockets and actually doing what human beings are supposed to do, explore fantastical new worlds for the glory of God. It's great in rocket ships, and it's even better for most of us in the books that we enjoy, fantastical and otherwise. Let's love them for Christ's glory and respect one another for the same purpose as we continue to seek and find our Lord and Savior's fantastical truth.